freedom is available. You have to believe for whatever you're believing for. There has to be a faith on the inside of you. And I'm going to talk about it here in a moment, but let me just put a footnote here. Faith is not hope. Many of us as believers have hope, but we have not matured into faith. Somebody say faith is not hope. Tell the person next to you, faith is not hope. Hope precedes faith, but faith is the assurance of what you have been hoping for. And we're going to talk about that progression here in a minute. But faith is required. Now, last week we talked about faith is it for the unseen. If you can see it, you don't need faith for it. Okay? So faith is for most times the things that we're complaining about, because we complain about the things we don't see. I don't have enough money. I don't have joy. I don't have peace. I need. Faith is the belief that those things exist in a different realm. And faith is what? The currency that pulls it from that realm to another. When we lack faith, and when we say this isn't available, there's no joy, there's no freedom, we're accusing God of having a limit. He has no limit. So in heaven, all things have been made available, and faith is in the unseen. It means I cannot see this in the natural, but listen, although you're a citizen of America, you're a citizen of a kingdom, of an invisible kingdom in a different realm, and you're placed here as an ambassador to bring what's there here. That is why faith is so important. Because the people you are surrounded in, the co-workers you may have, the friends you may have, you might be the only believer. You might be the only one with faith. None of them have access to what is in the heavenly realm. You do. Faith is the currency that begins to pull those things into this reality. Somebody say amen. Just because you cannot see it in the natural doesn't mean it isn't real. It doesn't mean that it's not made available. It just means that it's not transferred from one realm to another. Okay? Now, we're going to progress this week. And point number 1 is on the screen. Today, we're talking about faithfulness in the gap. Last week, we talked about faith in the gap. This week, we're talking about faithfulness in the gap. Everybody say faithfulness. Y'all are real weak today. Come on, say faithfulness. Y'all better wake up in this place. Come on, say it one more time. Say faithfulness. Faithfulness in the gap. Point number 1 is this: faith produces faithfulness. Faith produces. In other words, if you don't have faith, you can never be faithful. Faith produces faithfulness. It's not a faithfulness problem. It's always a faith problem. I'm going to convince you of it. It's not enough. Last week we talked about faith and believing God for those things. But it's not enough to just have faith in what God has said. Faith is within us. Faith is a belief system. However, genuine faith will produce faithfulness. Are you with me? Faithfulness, everybody say faith, full. Say it again, say faith, full. Faithfulness is this place where faith is growing on the inside of us. Okay? And it's grown and matured into a place where it begins to overflow into obedience. If your faith hasn't overflowed into obedience, we have to continue to grow our faith. Faithfulness is being so filled with faith that it changes the way that I live. Come on. It's being so filled with faith that my behavior begins to align with what I believe in, but what I can't see yet. Come on. It's being so filled with faith that it overflows into obedience to what God has said for my life. Many of us have not reached this place yet. And what we say is, I believe God, but what we're saying with our lives is, I believe God, but not enough to change my lifestyle. Like, I believe him, but not enough to rearrange my life for what I'm believing for. And when that is the case, you aren't postured to receive what you're believing for. It's kind of like Noah saying, I believe God, but not enough to build an ark. Like, I believe you that it's going to rain. Come on, you can talk with me. Come on, you can talk with me. We want to be a vocal church, right? I believe God that it's going to rain, but not enough to get the wood. But I believe him though. I believe God that it's going to rain and kill all of humanity, but I don't believe him enough. My faith in that has not manifested into obedience. Therefore, ark is still not built. What God will not do is say, okay, Noah, let me just send you a few drops. Because at that time, rain is an unknown thing. It was in the unseen. Water from the sky, come on. And what we want is like, can you just let it rain a little on Monday and then I'll start building? No, because then you can see it. Come on, somebody. Then faith is no longer required. You've just exited out of faith. Why doesn't God? Because he wants you to have faith in the unseen, because faith will manifest it. He's not going to interrupt the process of your faith. Because if faith is not required, there's not going to be a manifestation. So many of us in the room will claim that we believe God and we have faith, but your faith has not produced faithfulness in you. Genuine faith will make you faithful. It's really easy. It's kind of like Jesus has said, whoever the Son sets free is free indeed. Now, we all have a measure of faith in that, or we would not be here pressing in, believing God, going to healing retreats. We have a measure of faith. But I'm telling you, that faith has to grow to a place where we believe that in such a way to where what? We just start to align our lives to that reality. That faith in his freedom begins to cause me to be obedient to what he's already said. I just don't do the things that I used to. Why? I just have faith that I'm free. I don't go the places why? Because there's freedom. And I believe that so much that I'm going to be faithful to that word. I'm going to be faithful to that reality. If your faith has not produced faithfulness, you will not make it to the other side. Faithfulness is a necessity in the gap. Some of us have a measure of faith and everything in our life looks the same. What God wants to do is grow that faith on the inside of us. And that faith begins to change our entire life. Hope is step one. Some of you have lost all hope. And if you don't have hope, faith has nothing to attach to. Hope is the mother of faith. Hope gives birth to faith. Faith is what? The assurance of things hoped for. You need to wake up every morning and remind yourself of what you are hopeful for. Because if you don't have hope in that day, faith can't even manifest. It can only manifest when there's a hope that says, I have a feeling that this is going to happen. That's hope. I have a feeling that things are getting ready to change. I heard the message today, and I believe that there's freedom available. I believe that my family can change. I believe that my finances can. I just have a hope that if he did it for them, he can do it for me. That's hope. Everybody say hope. Hope grows into what we call faith. Everybody say faith. Faith is no longer hoping. Faith is knowing. Faith is being fully convinced. It's the assurance of things hoped for. I love the Amplified. It said it's the title deed of things hoped for. If your family handed you a title deed to a brand new home that was passed down, you ain't gonna let that thing go. You would fight no matter if there's already people living there. The moment you got that title deed, you would be proceeding with the process to say, okay, it's cool you're living here, but you don't own this place. I actually have the title deed. This is the assurance that this belongs to me. My name is on this. Faith is arriving at the place to where you're not just hoping, but you are absolutely convinced. Let me say this. If you are not absolutely convinced, keep growing in faith. If you doubting and you are kind of, no, you got to keep growing until you are absolutely convinced that this is going to happen in my life. Absolutely convinced for everything that God has said concerning your life. Now, faith will produce faithfulness. Hope produces faith. Faith produces faithfulness. Faith in the promise, this may be on the screen, produces faithfulness in the gap. Faith in the promise will produce faithfulness in the gap. A lack of faith will always result in unfaithfulness. A 3 days journey for the people of Israel turned into 40 years of wandering, and that entire generation still did not make it. But the root of it, if you go to the book of Hebrews, was lack of faith. Well, you say, well, yeah, but they were sinning and there was unfaithfulness, but the root of it is they did not believe God. The root of it was unbelief. You cannot be fully convinced of something that God has said. You cannot be fully convinced of that and be unfaithful to it. If you're unfaithful to it, you don't believe it yet. Come on. For example, the Lord had just split the sea. And they made it out. They seen the Egyptian soldiers drowned in the same sea that they walked across. And they reach a point to where God is ready to give them his law. And Moses then goes up on the mountain. Now, note, Moses is going to them saying, God is delivering us. They've been there for 400 years. God is delivering us from captivity and bringing us into the promised land. 400 years is a long time. That's all they knew. So much so that when it got hard, they wanted to revert back to captivity. What was that? Unbelief. When they made it to the sea and they seen the waters, immediately, they had seen the plagues, guys. They had seen the flies. They had seen the frog. They had seen blood in the water. They had seen God kill every Egyptian firstborn son. But yet, because of blood on their posts, he passed over their houses. All of these plagues had gone by. And this was God saying, I am delivering you. And they get to the sea, and the moment they get to the sea, they turn around to Moses and they said, oh, you brought us this far for us to die here. See, without faith, every challenge you think you're getting ready to die. Every challenge you think it don't matter what God just did for you. Because for some reason we think faith makes the journey challenge free. At that point, you no longer need faith. At that point, you're no longer a human. You're a God. You're an angel who doesn't have to struggle with sin, right? But the angels look upon you and wonder. They awe at this creation. They're trying to figure out this entire plan that God has made. And they cannot understand you because they worship God, but things are perfect. They look upon you and they say they're going through hell, but yet they worship the same way that we worship him. They don't know what it feels like to be redeemed. They don't know what it feels like to be rescued. They don't know what it feels like to struggle and God's grace meet us in our time of need. They don't know what that feels like. So when I think of that, I think that our worship should outdo the angels because we have been redeemed. God has brought us out. of danger. He has rescued us. So the Israelites, they go through all of these plagues, they get to the water, and they say, did you bring us here to die? And what was their, they were speaking out of their mentality, because it's not a mouth problem. Soap won't fix a tongue, because out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Soap ain't gonna do anything. It's a heart issue. So out of the abundance of their heart and their mentality, which was still in Egypt, they left Egypt, but they were still in Egypt. Come on. They left Egypt, but they were still in Egypt. They left Egypt, but they were still in Egypt. Okay? They left bondage, but they were still in bondage. So much so that they said, we had it better in Egypt. We had it better. Why? Because we don't believe that God can do this. My life was better when I was smoking weed. Y'all gonna wake up in this place. I will step all on your toes. If you notice a trick with me, that when you give me some feedback, I ease up and we just start going into the glory. I start patting you on the back and we talk. But see, when y'all just stare at me, I start coming in and I'm looking for somebody's toes. I had it better when I was living in fornication. I had it better. All that is a sign and a symptom. When you begin to revert back to sin, you need to check your faith. Because you think that Egypt is better than the promise. You've taken your eyes off the promise. You don't even see the promise. Why else would you go back to Egypt? Why else would you revert back to captivity if you have faith in the fullness of what God has for you? There's no way possible. A lack of faith will always produce unfaithfulness. God says that He has made you whole, that everything you need is found in Him. There's no way I can have faith in that and look for something else. Come on. If I'm looking for something else to satisfy me, it's simply a faith issue that I am not convinced that God is enough. I don't believe that I can wake up in the morning and He fully satisfy me. I don't believe it. I need this, I need that, I need this, because I'm not convinced of that. Freedom comes by faith. It's only when you are fully convinced that, wait a minute, God has everything that I need. I never have to turn to any other thing for fulfillment or satisfaction a day in my life. Sin is broken. When we get fully convinced of it. You can try all you want, but it's not a works issue. It is a faith issue. But genuine faith will produce faithfulness. So Moses is on the mountain. He's getting the 10 Commandments. He's in the glory of God. The people are on the ground, and about a week goes by, and they begin to say, what happened to Moses? Is he coming back? We don't even know. And they tell Aaron, Aaron, would you make gods for us that we may worship the gods? And Aaron, fearful of the people's response, tells all the ladies, okay, take all the gold off, and and he makes these calves, and then they begin to dance and bow down to these calves, saying this, these are the gods that brought us out of Egypt. How offensive. How do you feel God felt in that moment? Perform these miracles, and they have this golden calf, and they're saying, this is the God that brought us out of Egypt. And it was because of a lack of faith. They didn't see Moses anymore. They don't think they're going to make it to the other side. And it results in unfaithfulness. What I'm trying to convince you of is that genuine faith will have, here's something I like to say. I like to put this like this, is every sin is unbelief in the gospel. Every sin is unbelief in the gospel. Stress, anxiety, addiction, bondage, sex. It's unbelief in the finished work of Jesus. You're not fully convinced that He actually set us free. Hebrews 3:12 says this, be careful then, dear brothers and sisters, make sure that your own hearts are not evil and unbelieving. You see how he attaches those two? Evil and unbelieving. Turning away from the living God. Do you see this? He attaches unbelief with turning away. And he's pulling it from the example of the people in Israel. that when your heart goes into unbelief, there will always be a turning away. When you are fully convinced of what God has for you, when you are fully convinced of what He's spoken over your life, temptation can look you in the face and you are going to be unwavering. Why? Because I see something better. I'm firmly established in the belief of what God has for me. And when I have faith in this thing just cannot compare to what God has for me. He says, you must warn each other every day while it is still called today, so that none of you will be deceived by sin and hardened against God. For if we are faithful, somebody say faithful. If we are faithful to the end, trusting God just as firmly as when we first believed, we will share in all things that belong to Christ. Faith is the evidence of what I do not see, and faithfulness is the evidence of my faith. Your faith needs evidence. Noah could have said he believed God all day long, but the ark was the evidence of his faith. So many of us really, truly, deep down, honestly, if we were going to be for real, you don't have faith because there's no evidence on it. There's no evidence there's no arks in your life that you have built because God is getting ready to do something. Notice none of the animals came until the ark was finished. It's the principles of God. No rain came until the ark was finished because faith manifested. It was Him finishing the ark that brought forth the word of the Lord that He was going to send rain upon the earth. When the ark was finished, God then had permission to move. You think you're waiting on God, and God is waiting for you to give Him permission. You give Him for permission through the evidence of your faith. Whenever you build the ark and you say, God, I believe in you, He says, okay, you gave me permission. Here comes the rain. Here comes the animals. They're coming from anywhere. Everything you need starts coming when you build the ark. Are you with me today? Everything starts coming when you build the ark. But what we do is we got the piles of wood. Maybe we got some hammers and we nail, and we just sitting there like, God, when are you going to do something? When are you going to move? Give me a sign. Show me a bear. Just show me a bear. Let a bird fly by. Send a droplet of rain. And we think that we need to see something in order to progress with what He's called us to do. God is waiting for you to finish. Why? Because that is the evidence that your faith has come into completion and that you are fully convinced that God will do exactly what He said He will do. Somebody say amen. My faith causes me to be faithful. I am faithful because I believe God. Well, why do you walk in obedience? Why? Because my faith causes me to be faithful. There's no way that I can turn away or turn around because of my faith, not just in what God has for me in this life, but what He has for me in the next life. There's an inheritance. There's a crown of righteousness. I'm not laboring for nothing. I am fully convinced that everything I do for the Lord is not in vain. I am fully convinced that every time I turn away from sin and turn away and I trust in His promises, He fulfills me. He satisfies me. I'm growing in glory. He's being glorified. He's being pleased with my life. My faith causes me to be faithful. I'm faithful because I believe God. It is the process. I've alluded to it before about Elizabeth. Any day now, we should be having a baby. But when the baby was conceived, we actually didn't see anything happen. And I'm like, I have a delayed response when it comes to pregnancies. It was like last week, I was like, oh, snaps. Like, this is for real. It was like, I had it in my mind. Who knows, it takes time to change your paradigm. And if you ever get to the other side without your paradigm changing, you will always, who knows the other side is going to have challenges too. And every challenge you have on the other side, you will revert back to Egypt and say, I had it better. Why? Because Egypt is still your paradigm. God has to make the promise your paradigm before He manifests the promise in your life. This is why He told Abraham, go out and look at the stars, Abraham. He's a visual God. He already told him what He was going to do. Look at the stars. He was trying to get him to see a visual. As numerous as the stars are, so shall your descendants be. What was he doing? He was trying to change his paradigm. Something happened in Abraham when he said, dang, as numerous as this? This is a lot of stars. This is crazy. See, his paradigm began to shift. His paradigm began to change. So in the gap, God is trying to change your paradigm. And it takes time before there's a birthing. This has been a gradual process. but it's growing, and it's getting bigger and bigger. And there was a time where the doctors told us, and the little testy thingies told us that there was a baby in her stomach. There was no evidence of that. But if you would treat the baby in the womb as faith, faith began to grow and it began to be evident. And it reached the point just last week, I got a delayed response. I don't know why, but last week I was laying in bed and I'm like, oh my goodness, there's going to be a baby here. Like, we're going to be holding this baby in our home. He doesn't even exist in this place yet, and he's going to have his own personality. I had that moment last week. And what happened is as the pregnancy goes on, that faith, that seed is growing. It's becoming more evident. And when it becomes absolute, I'm sure it's been evident to her from the beginning. She's felt it. But when it becomes absolutely evident, now what we have, I was going to show you a picture. We have what you call a bassinet by our bed. And the baby's not here yet. But we're fully convinced. We're fully convinced that what does not exist in our room at this moment is getting ready to come any moment. And because it's getting ready to come any moment, we have bags packed. We have a bassinet. His room is finished because it's going to come any moment. Now, if we were lacking faith, and this is what we look like, just so they can get the visual, you know what I'm talking about? This is what we look like. I'm just not really sure if we're going to have a baby. I don't really know. It's like, I feel like we're going to have a baby. I don't know when. I don't know. Sometimes I really doubt that we are. And I feel like there was a time where God was saying that we're going to have a baby, but I don't really believe that we're going to have a baby anymore. Things have been hard. He's not here yet. We had this faith and we were preparing his room. He's still not in the room and nothing's really happening. And she started to have contractions, but she's not anymore. So I think in a different season. I think in a different season that we're going to have this baby. I think it's going to come at a different time. It's just not our moment. We're just not even ready for it right now. And it don't matter if we're ready for it. This thing is coming because it is the predestined time for it to come. But that's what we look like in our life as believers. Big old bellies getting ready to give birth to the promises of God, and you are unconvinced. No bassinet, no room prepared, no ark, no wood, no nothing. What are you waiting on? God is waiting on you to be fully convinced until your faith becomes evident. If you say you have faith, show me with the evidence of your faithfulness. We're applying for jobs that require slacks and button-ups, and you ain't been shopping yet. Come on, somebody, I'm about to get you. You just got t-shirts. You ain't convinced yet. Until you say, I'm getting ready to get this job. I got to be prepared because I feel like they're getting ready to call me any day now. And they said, I need slacks. And if you don't have slacks and button-ups, you ain't ready for it. This is the principles of the kingdom, that faithfulness, everybody say faithfulness, is the evidence of my faith. Faithfulness is the evidence of my faith. Until I get faithful, thank you for front row. Thank you. Until I get faithful, I don't believe it yet. Faith is unwavering. If your faith wavers, so will your faithfulness. If your faith wavers, so will your faithfulness. You are only unfaithful in times where your faith is wavering. The word waver means to sway to and fro. It means to become unsteady. It means to begin to fail or give away your faith. It means to begin to show doubt. I love this in Romans chapter 4, verse 18 on the screen. Even when there was no reason for hope, Abraham kept hoping. Even when there was no reason for hope. Here the author of the Bible is saying, he genuinely had no natural reason to hope. There was no reason for him to have hope in his situation. Yet he kept hoping, believing that he would become the father of many nations. For God had said to him, that's how many descendants you will have. And Abraham's faith, somebody said, did not weaken. Even though at about 100 years of age, he figured his body was as good as dead, and so was Sarah's womb. It is absolutely hopeless. Abraham never wavered in believing God's promise. He never wavered in believing God's promise. In fact, his faith grew stronger. And in this, he brought glory to God. You don't just glorify God when the promises manifest. You bring glory to God when hell is breaking loose and you lift your hands and you say, I just believe God. It's crazy. It doesn't make any sense to anybody else, but I believe God's word. All of a sudden, God gets glory. Why? He gets glory from your faith. He gets glory from your faith. The Bible says that he never wavered in his faith, but yet his faith grew stronger. Why? In the midst of hopelessness, it grew stronger. In the midst of challenge, it grew stronger. And as a result, he brought glory to God. He was fully convinced that God is able to do whatever he promises. And because of Abraham's faith, God counted him as righteous. Here's point number 3. To every promise on the screen, there is a gap. To every promise, there is a gap. But without the gap, you wouldn't appreciate the promise. To every promise, there's a gap. But without the gap, you would not appreciate the promise. Without a gap, your promise would become common too quickly. Has God ever blessed you with something new and the new gets old and you start treating it old? Without the gap, you wouldn't appreciate the promise. If it is good and it is God, it is worth waiting for. And if you are not worth waiting for it, if you are not willing to wait for it, then at this point you don't deserve it. Because if you got it, you would underappreciate it. But there's something about when God makes us wait, that the waiting process produces an appreciation that will sustain the promise when you get it. If you get it before the appreciation has grown in you, guess what? You will get it and then lose it, because who knows, you got to steward promises in order for them to remain. This is why sometimes in our life we get something and we lose it. The gap is important because God is trying to build your appreciation. So therefore, when you do get to the other side, you value what you have been praying for. If you ain't prayed about it, you ain't ready for it. You wouldn't appreciate it. If you haven't pressed in for it, you're not ready for it. You wouldn't appreciate it. If you've not cried over it, you're not ready for it. You wouldn't appreciate it. If you've not gone through hell to get the promises of God, you wouldn't appreciate it. Well, think about this. Think if the moment we were saved, we just received everything. We became perfected, no more sin, no more struggle, all financially blessed. Everything's just perfect. Guess what? This church will be empty as well as every church across America. We would no longer appreciate, no longer need. There would be no more need for Jesus. There would be nobody at prayer meetings. What are you going to pray about? You have nothing to pray for. What do you have to believe for? The delay is for your good. It builds an appreciation. If there is no gap, you won't value the promise when you get it. It's an important principle that you must know in your heart, that the gap is building my appreciation for what God has promised me. He anointed David as king, and nothing happened. 13 to 15 years later, David became king. There's a gap. And in that gap, his spiritual leader was trying to kill him. Joseph gets a promise that he was going to be a ruler, and then he gets in a pit and then goes to a prison, gets accused of sexual harassment. There's a gap there. And in the gap, God is building our appreciation. Here's what blows me away, is we have to know that no matter how big the gap, tell your neighbor, be faithful. No matter how big the gap, be faithful. Abraham never saw his descendants, did he? He never saw his descendants become as numerous as the sky. Moses never entered the promised land. None of the Old Testament saints or prophets that prophesied about the Messiah, none of them seen him. The Bible articulates that you are enjoying what they were dying to see, what they were serving, what they were prophesying. You got to see it. You are in the days of it. It blows my mind when I look back in the Old Testament and I begin to see and realize that Abraham never got what God promised him. But it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Moses never entered into the promised land. But it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Genesis 2 records the first messianic prophecy that Jesus is coming. Thousands of years later, they're waiting for him. They die without seeing him. And then all of a sudden, a virgin gets pregnant. To every good promise, there's always a gap. You must be faithful in the gap. What if what we're praying for, you won't see? But guess what? If you will be faithful, your children won't have to walk in the gap that you've been standing in. There won't be a gap for them. They just walk into the promise because you are faithful in the midst of your gap. Let me challenge your faith one last time with this final point. Faithfulness is not settling, it's expecting. Faithfulness is not settling, it's expecting. Faithfulness is not just, okay, I'm just going to keep on being faithful where I'm at and just keep on doing what I'm doing and I'm just trying to be faithful. No, you're not being faithful. You're settling for this level. Faithfulness is not settling, it's expecting. If you keep on doing what you have always done, you will always get the same results. Faithfulness is not settling. I'm saying this because I had a sense in my spirit that some of you think you're being faithful, but really you've just settled with where you're at right now. Faithfulness is not just, but I'm just being faithful where God has me. Be faithful there, but faithfulness is not settling. Faithfulness is expecting. Let me say it like this. The level of my faithfulness must match the level that I'm believing for. The level of my faithfulness must match the level that I am believing for. Let me say it like this. Your lifestyle has to line up with what you are believing for. Your lifestyle has to line up with what you, let me say it even more simple. Even when I am not on the other side, I start acting like it. Are you with me? Faithfulness is not settling, it is expecting. Even when I'm not on the other side, I start acting like it. If God has promised you a new car, you begin to treat the old one like it's the new one. You're not just faithful with the old one. You say, okay, God is getting ready to give me a new car. Therefore, everything that I'm going to do with a new car, I'm going to act like. Why? Because my faithfulness must match the level that I'm believing for. If your faithfulness is just at the level you're at, you're not going to see the next level. You're going to get the same results. Your faithfulness has to go to the level that you are believing for. You act like you have it before you have it. If you would polish that car, start polishing the old one. If you would clean it every week, start cleaning the old. Start doing those things. Why? Because you are being faithful not to where you're at. I'm being faithful to where God is calling me to be. Are you with me? I'm beginning to be faithful with where God is. I'm believing God for a job that requires me to be there at 6 a.m. and I don't have it yet, but I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. And when I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to get in the shower. Why? Because I'm going to be faithful by faith with where God is calling me to, not just where I'm at. If you're believing God for a job that's calls you to be there at 5 a.m. and you're still staying up till 3, waking up at noon, you ain't ready yet. You're faithful to an old season. Come on, talk to me. You are faithful to an old season. What I'm trying to get you to understand is that your faith must grow to the new season you're getting ready to go into.